Hello and welcome to another video lesson. Today we're going to talk about standard deviation and how it applies to the normal distribution curve. Let's get started. If you know that our data is normally distributed, then our histogram is going to be symmetrical. And that allows us to apply a few other statistical pieces of information when describing our data. To begin with, the highest point is going to happen at the mean. And this allows us to cut our information in half. So the mean in this case is also going to be the median for our data. As we move to the left or to the right of our data, we have set increments of standard deviations. So as you move to the right, we have 1 standard deviation or 2 standard deviations. As you move to the left, you're subtracting 1 standard deviation or 2. And creating those intervals allows us to break our data down even more to some very specific percentages that will always be the same. In between 1 standard deviation away from our mean, we capture 68% of our data, 34% on each side. And these percentages are always going to be the same no matter what the data is, as long as it is normally distributed and we have our mean as our median. Between 1 and 2 standard deviations, we have an additional 13.5%. And again, these percentages will always be the same. And finally, if we go past 2 standard deviations on either side, we have the remaining 2.5% on each side, giving us a total of 100%. The nice part about the way this graph is set up is we can break down our data and compare it and find the percent between any 2 intervals that we want. We're going to go ahead and apply that with some examples now. I would ask you to go ahead and write these percentages down and try and memorize them because they are always going to be the same no matter what the data is, again, as long as we have a normally distributed data set. Alright, so the first thing we want to be able to do with these problems is label our diagram. We know that the mean is 184. That's going to go in the very middle. As you move to the right, we are adding our standard deviation. In this case, the standard deviation is 5 centimeters. So if I add 5 centimeters to 184, I now have 189. If I add 5 again, now I have 194. As you move to the left, we're subtracting the standard deviation. So if I subtract 5, then I have 179. And if I subtract 5 again, I have 174. So now the way we use these graphs most often is I would ask you what percent of the data is between certain scores. So for example, what percent of the data is between 179 and 194? And since we already have our categories labeled, we know that it's 34 plus 34 plus 13.5. So the percent of data that's between 179 and 194 is going to be 81.3%. Here's another problem where again we're going to start by filling out our diagram and then answer some questions. So in this case we know that our mean is 77 and the standard deviation is 7. So we're going to start with our mean in the very middle. And as we move to the right, we're going to add our standard deviation. So if I add 77, then we get 84. If I add it one more time, I get 91. As you move to the left, you're going to subtract. So when I subtract 77 from 77, we get 70 and then 63. I can go ahead and ask some follow-up questions. For example, what percent of the data is between 70 and 84? Or what percent is less than 63 and greater than 84? And different questions that are like that. I'm going to go ahead and give you a few questions now where I want you to try and fill things out on your own and then answer the questions I give you. For our next question, the weight of newborn giraffes are normally distributed with a mean of 95 and a standard deviation of 8 pounds. And then we have 2 questions. Find the percent of giraffes that weigh between 87 and 111 pounds, and find the percent of giraffes that weigh between 103 and 111 pounds. So go ahead and hit pause now, set up your diagram here, label your x-axis, and then answer the 2 questions. Alright, so now that we have our axis labeled, we can go ahead and answer our questions. So the first question is again, find the percent of giraffes that weigh between 87 and 111 pounds. So we have 3 areas that represent that group, and we have the percentages for those. Our two middle ones are both 34%, and then our outside one is 13.5. If we add those together, then we get approximately, or actually exactly, 81.5%. To answer our second question of the percent of giraffes weigh between 103 and 111, we have just this region here, and our percent again for that one was 13.5. So again, just to recap, 81.5% of the giraffes weigh between 87 and 111 pounds, and then 13.5% of the giraffes weigh between 103 and 111 pounds. This concludes our notes for this section. Second period, you guys have the worksheet to go in ahead and get started. For first period, you guys can look online to get the worksheets on Google Classroom, or you can wait and I will give you a handout in class on Thursday. Alright, go ahead and start the homework, guys.